The concept that I'm going to be addressing today is how do we pre-plan the content of our thoughts? How do we get ourselves to make good decisions based on good background skills training that we've done in terms of our mental skills, so that we are able to execute on race day? So very often what happens is when we are under the stress of racing, tactics come into play, nutrition comes into play, hydration comes into play, effort comes into play, but also very much what comes into play is our expectations of ourselves. And we find if we go into races and we don't have a very, very clear, well thought out, well rehearsed background information in terms of how we're going to execute this race, we can easily fall afoul of our doubts and little things that occur on race day that are bound to happen that derail our race plan. And one of those things is a change in our thought content from when we are training and when we are training effectively, and then when we go into a race. We have greater expectations. There's greater stresses in racing than in training. And very often, many competitors don't perform according to their standard on race day because of this very factor. One of the things that I teach that I find extremely useful and that endurance athletes glom onto and use very effectively is the concept of, instead of thinking of changing their mindset, rather to replace it with another thought. So if you have the thought that you're not very effective when you race in the heat, you don't really want to have a thought that says, well, I want to be a little less ineffective in the heat. I suck in the heat, and now I want to suck a little less. All right? The core concept then is still that you're not very effective in the heat. So if you looked at the green line, that would be the poor thinking. All right? And if you continue that line with another line into space and they were parallel, then they would never touch each other. And so if we get, less ineffective, in other words, we suck a little less in hills, we still have the central core concept that we're not very effective in the heat. All right? So we have to replace that thinking with another thought, which is, I do very well in the hills, or I'm a good hill runner, or I do very well in the heat, or whatever the case might be, where you formerly believed that you weren't very effective, and then habituate that. Especially looking back at the kind of training you've done, how much you've improved. Also looking at the fact that you have completed and done reasonably well, or done, completed races in those conditions, and that you were actually pretty effective at that, not just as effective as you wanted to be. So the concept of taking a poor piece of internal dialogue and replacing it with a new piece of dialogue which overlays that, and then habituating that thought content, especially reinforcing it with training data and data that's come from races where you did particularly well in those conditions, which you believed of yourself in terms of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you weren't very effective with that. So try and look at what your thought content is when you're racing, when you're doing tougher training sessions. What's holding you back? Which parts of your race are you not that effective at? And then see if you can find the thinking that leads to that ineffectivity, and then replace those thoughts. And then make sure you habituate them so that you take ownership of them, and that those thoughts come to mind when you then under race pressure. If they come to mind under race pressure, then the process is complete. Especially if you then go focus on the execution of the very thing that will lead to a better performance than that thought that led to you failing in that department.